So to begin with, then, can you tell us in brief your history with religion?
Yes, certainly. I was from a mildly Catholic family. My dad, at least, was Roman Catholic. My mum was the Church of England. But my dad abandoned his Catholic faith after struggling with it, I think, for many years, when I was probably about 7 or 8. So I didn't catch the real disease, as it were. But I suppose it did make me interested. And I think as a child, I always believed there was God, and that God was good. And then I became a Christian when I was 16 through some friends of mine at school who just seemed, I think, to have some of the answers that I think I was looking for. I was quite a thoughtful 16-year-old. And I was converted to evangelical Christianity and initially loved it. I started going to a church which was full of bright young people whose company I enjoyed enormously. I then went to university at Southampton and in my final year became president of the Christian Union. Stayed on in Southampton, in fact, and stayed at the big city centre evangelical church I'd been attending. Met a young woman who I fell in love with, and we married and had a family and ran the church youth group for a number of years. So I was following, I suppose, this very orthodox evangelical Christian route. But the longer it went on, the bigger the gap seemed to me between the promise and the reality. And what Christianity promises, at least evangelical Christianity promises, is a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And I think I probably knew fairly early on that was stretching the truth a bit, shall we say. And the Christian friends that I knew, who of course some of whom were very lovely people, I think also didn't demonstrate any reality in their lives. And that became more and more of a problem to me, especially I think in my own life. And I think that really my commitment and enthusiasm gradually faded over the years. But about when I was probably in my sort of mid to late 40s, my wife and I went through a marital crisis, and that sort of tipped me back into searching again for the truth, really, about my faith. And I went back to reading the Bible, but I read much more broadly than that as well. And once I started reading books by people like Sam Harris and Dan Dennett and Christopher Hitchens, I think their writing made me see the questions that I'd had for a long time and just opened that up to proper intellectual debate, really. And the Bible really was no help, and neither were Christian friends. In fact, I think my reading the Bible in a different way showed me just how terrible the God of the Bible actually is, and you can only really come up with a good view of God if you cherry pick quite intensely. Well, and so it actually unraveled very quickly, Dane. And I left the faith with some large sigh of relief. I must say that I no longer had to pretend that this was real.
Look, I think as well that's a lot of what you've just said. You can sort of see the influence of that in a Brief Eternity as well. So I think almost you've taken that like a literal representation of what the Bible says, and then there's kind of I think that's when you were talking about the difference between the promise and the reality. It's almost a mirror of that, because there is the cherry picked pop culture version of heaven, and then your version where you do take it all completely literally. Is that something that you set out to do?
Well, I don't know that I did set out to do. In fact, the book started as a short story on a creative writing course I was doing, and it's the part which survived into the book, although it was heavily modified. I had this idea of describing a pub quiz in heaven with Jesus as the quizmaster, because I thought it was funny. And having written that, I then thought maybe I could turn this into something bigger, maybe a novel. And I think as I developed the book, of course, it was hugely informed by what I knew, which was evangelical Christianity and what I'd experienced. Some people say you should always write what you know about, and I decided to write about heaven and hell. Not that I really know about them, of course. But I think what the book enabled me to do was to front up and ask some questions which really troubled me and my faith. For example, if evangelicals are right, then they will go to heaven, and non-believers like me will go to hell, as will Muslims and Jews and Hindus and Sikhs, and not entirely sure where the Roman Catholics will end up. Some of them may be in hell too. And it bothered me for a long time. How on earth could heaven be bliss if you knew that people that you loved were in hell, being tormented for all eternity? And in fact, even if they are annihilated, it's not much better. And actually, I think the only options are either you don't know and you're kept in ignorance, in which case, what sort of God is doing that to you that he should treat you so shabbily as to keep you in ignorance? And it would have to be a massive ignorance. I mean, you'd have to have forgotten that you once knew these people. Or alternatively, if you did know that they were there, then how could it be blissful? I mean, that problem alone is enough, I think, to make you realize that the evangelical view of heaven and hell cannot possibly be true. It's logically flawed. So yes, you're quite right. It enabled me to give voice to that and many other issues that I'd faced in my Christian faith. Not least the nastiness of of God, really.
Yeah. Okay, so one question I've been dying to ask you as well, as it's obviously it's on the approach to Christmas. What do you think the Jesus of your novel will be doing to celebrate his birthday this year?
Yeah, that is a very good question. Well, I think that the Jesus of A Brief Eternity is he's a bit of a spoilt boy, really. And I think to some extent I still feel rather sorry for him, because he's living in the shadow of his creator father, who did this fabulous job of creating the universe and then went mad and started to sort of hurt everybody and everything he'd get his hands on. So, but nevertheless, he's the sort of big charismatic character. And Jesus is the son that's inherited the estate, and he didn't do it on his own, and he's always sort of playing catch up. And I think he's eternally unhappy. I think he'll be looking forward to smoking a nice cigar or two, or maybe getting through a few packs of cigarettes, and he'll be looking for something to take away from him the gnawing anxiety that he's probably been rather spoilt, and he's maybe not quite good enough. And imagine what kind of screwed up mind he must have with all those sycophants all around him, just praising him, singing all those dire songs and all the time. Yeah. So I think Jesus is miserable, and it's not surprising he gets grumpy from time to time. Who'd want to be like him, huh?
Yeah. And another question I wondered as well. So if you had to choose between going to your version of heaven or your version of hell, which one would you choose and
why? Well, I'm very reluctant to answer that question because that's kind of where the book ends, really.
This is true,
and I think that it is a very good question. I think that, as it says in the book, hell is called hell for a reason. I don't think I could see myself enjoying that experience, the slow, painful death that never actually delivers death. And I certainly don't think I could enjoy an experience in heaven, even though the weather's nice and the food's good, knowing that my loved ones were not there, were in fact in hell. In fact, knowing that anybody was in hell. And I think ultimately the comfort of oblivion is is somewhat appealing.
Yeah, I think that's, well, I suppose one of the things is that's kind of a question the book makes the reader ask as well. Like, is that something that you wanted to achieve, or?
Yeah. Yes, it's exactly what I wanted to achieve. But what was really interesting to me, Dane, was I didn't know how it was going to end.
Yeah.
And I think I probably worked out the ending when I was about halfway through writing the book. And that was a surprise to me, really. When I started writing it, I was still working with the Open College of the Arts on the creative writing course, and I wrote to my tutor at the time and said, I suppose I should send you a plan of the novel, because in my real life, as it were, I'm a management consultant, and I spend quite a lot of time on plans, project plans and so on, and I just thought, well, that's what you must do. And I also thought, all these novelists who write these terribly complicated plot things, they must have thought about it beforehand. And in fact, she sent me an email by reply and said, no, don't do that. Just start writing it. You'll be too constrained. And actually, it was a fabulous bit of advice for me. But that's why I didn't know how it was going to end when I started. I had some idea. And then when the ending, as it were, came to me, as I say, about halfway through, I was so pleased with it. I thought, oh, that's I'm really going to enjoy writing that. Interestingly, I got to about 75%, 80% of the way through. I did have to plan the ending because I had to draw it all together. If I hadn't done that, it would have been chaotic. But I was looking forward to writing the ending, and in fact, I did write it at 1:30 in the morning in my house where I was at the time in Southampton, and I actually found it a very moving experience. In fact, when I finally typed that last sentence, I knew what the last sentence was going to be for some time, and I read it and poured myself a glass of chilled white wine and just enjoyed the moment.
Great. And I think one last question to end on, which we ask everyone, is what was the last book you read, and what did you think of it?
Well, the last book I read was actually my first ever Virginia Woolf book, which was To the Lighthouse, and I couldn't quite decide whether I really loved it or really hated it. And, I read it for my book club, and I think it was universally despised by the group, and I sort of gave it half marks because I thought the writing is so beautiful and so wonderfully constructed, and I mark passages that I enjoy when I read, and I could have marked something on every single page, but the plot was so dull, and nothing happened, and that was so infuriating. I couldn't quite decide whether I was, wanted to throw it across the room or rejoice in it. So it was a very strange experience. I'm glad I've read a Virginia Woolf, but I'm not entirely sure I'll hurry to read another one.